Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Jim Duffy again. We have a great panel. The topic for this panel, making legacy supply chains more sustainable. Shaping the content for the panel, I wanted to focus on overlapping areas of interest for both investors interested in the accountability of enterprises, but also consumers interested in the sustainability of brands. One programming note, Mike Colarosi from Avery Dennison had to back out, so we'll have just the two panelists. I expect a lively discussion. I think you'll find the session super insightful. Joining us from Everledger, Carrie George, Everledger's VP and Head of Sustainability and Impact, and from Textile Genesis, Amit Gautam, CEO and founder. So what I'd like to do is start by asking each of you to introduce yourself. Carrie, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. Thanks again for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. As you said, I'm with Everledger. I work on sustainability and circular economy strategies, both for the corporation as well as for our products. We believe at looking at sustainability and circular economy from people, product, and planet perspective and aim for impact in each of those categories, whether it be for our own corporate practices or for what our products are enabling with our clients.
Great. Amit?
Yes, hi. Hello, everyone. This is Amit Gautam. I'm CEO and founder of Textile Genesis. We are a blockchain-enabled traceability platform for textile and fashion industry, focusing on all the sustainable materials that are used in the textile industry. And we invented this idea of fiber coins, and I'm sure I'll go back later into the discussion, but essentially creating a digital twin of the physical product to create end-to-end traceability. Yeah.
Excellent. So to kick things off, Carrie, let's start with you. For brands that have the objective to become more sustainable, the first step of course, is tracking and establishing baselines. How do companies get started tracking data related to sustainability, such as greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, and so forth?
Not to be too self-serving, but one of the reasons I came to blockchain was because in order to do a lot of these metrics, particularly for GHG Scope 3 reporting, you have to actually have that enablement of tracking across your supply chain. That is the foundation that really enables you to capture any of these metrics further. And when you look at some of the challenges of getting this data, a lot of times it's because companies and your upstream either don't know you directly or don't want to give you that data directly. And that's where blockchain and different types of emerging technologies really support that. But what I would recommend companies doing is, one, making sure you understand what impacts you want to have or what your high risk areas that you want to avoid are. And then really looking at collaboration. That's going to be across audits, it's going to be across reporting, and it's going to be across emerging technologies. We look at interoperability as a key area for work across different supply chains to really enable the ecosystems. And we can go into more detail, but those would be my key focuses.
And then if I may stick with you for a moment, what are some of the common areas of resistance or challenges around tracking something like emissions or water consumption? Do organizations oftentimes get pushback around those efforts?
It's less around collecting a specific metric if it's your B2B relationship. When you buy and sell with someone, they're much more willing to give you that information. It's when you go beyond your first business contract relationship and into the further dynamics, anytime you're asking something that you're not doing direct business with someone, it becomes more and more of an issue for them to start reporting any type of data. But the issues with greenhouse gas emissions, the data that you are showing or the evidence that you're showing could have sensitive information such as commercial information. If you can reverse engineer someone's energy usage, you might be able to reverse engineer information about their profit loss, their production value, et cetera. And that's where it gets tricky for these companies to disclose certain information.
Interesting. So, Amit, a lot of your work is around the provenance of raw materials in apparel supply chains. What are the key challenges around tracking and auditing materials in a multi-tiered supply chain? And what type of resistance might a brand see as they try to push upstream channel partners to cooperate with them on this effort?
Right. I think Kerry already highlighted a couple of them. I think the biggest one that we see in terms of challenge is a standardized data definition, right? You'll be surprised, even as brands operating in the same geography, selling similar products, they'll be calling the same things in 10 different ways, right? Their product definition is not similar. Many times, the composition, the way product composition is defined is quite varied. What someone calls a tier 2, something as simple thing as a tier 2 supplier, you get 10 different responses of who is a tier 2 supplier. Is a trader a tier 2 supplier? Is it actually a manufacturer? What about the subcontracting and commissioning of the work? Because there's a lot of subcontracting and commissioning that happens in the industry, right? So I think the first most fundamental is to have a standardized data definition, right? But it's not a very sexy area to talk about. It's not very sexy to talk about, okay, let's standardize data definition. But I can tell you, you cannot create any meaningful impact. At least that's what we see across the value chain. And that to me is the biggest challenge, that each player across the whole value chain from tier 6 all the way to tier 1, they understand how do you define a yarn, a fabric, a garment, right? The resistance, I would say, to your second point, what has been the resistance? I think this is sometimes around data privacy and confidentiality, because you're naturally capturing the supplier and customer information for each tier in the supply chain. So they're of course apprehensive. If other competitors have access to the data, what does it mean for their competitive position, right? I mean, it can be easily addressed, but that to me is one of the key resistance. And second is also harmonization between different systems, right? Sometimes they're actually doing different technology platforms. So I think how we can make systems interoperable between different systems is another important pain point, especially from suppliers and brand perspective, that we can address.
Thank you. I want to talk about incentives. Kerry, in your experience, what are the right and wrong ways for brands to incentivize supply chain partners for collaborating on sustainability initiatives?
Yeah, I will say some of the wrong ways, and I'll touch a little bit on what Amit said. When you're communicating information that doesn't actually align or it contradicts what an industry association or partnership says, this becomes incredibly problematic. I'll give a few examples. When I was working at Apple, I was leading several efforts on responsible sourcing, and then also in some of the work they're doing in labor issues in their supply chain. And when we were looking at responsible sourcing efforts there, what our focus was how do we get to our targets as well as align with the industry. I had a wonderful supplier call me and say, Kerry, when Apple gets a little sniffle, everyone else gets the worst flu. And so you have to recognize that your ripple effect really has impact on the supply chain. And a lot of brands don't appreciate that when they change a definition, when they change a target, it can affect thousands of entities. So if you change a reporting framework without really working with a group, you've actually done yourself a disservice as well as the entire supply chain. So the incentive is really about alignment, making sure it's consistent, making sure your definitions are clear, making sure your timelines make sense. There's a lot of executives that will go out and make these big lofty goals, but without really checking with their subject matter experts to see if those goals can be done without de-incentivizing positive action and real progress. The positive sides of it are when brands and retailers particularly start partnering with the organizations too, and this comes out naturally with some of the work that they do when they're figuring out what is reasonable and what can be done effectively. And when they start partnering with their organizations that are with the companies that they're working with in really coming up with the right solutions, it's amazing how quickly that work goes forward. So I'll give examples of when I would actually go in the field and bring some of my senior executives with me. It was amazing how quickly associations in Indonesia, Congo, and places in Colombia really started making progress because they saw that we were serious and that partnership was what our goal was ultimately, to meet those impacts.
That's super interesting. So they just appreciated having the executives visit the local facilities. That gave them confidence that there was more buy-in.
And even in some cases, it wasn't even going to their facilities. It was just sitting around a round table and truly talking about the real issues.
What are some of the other human nature aspects of implementing sustainability reporting infrastructures that can cause shortcomings, mistakes, or could even lead to fraudulent claims?
I think, and not to beat this up too much, but a lot of it really has to do with reasonableness. If you're talking to a partner across the table and they can tell that you either don't really understand the scenario or the situation, you're using information or high-level topics that really don't get to the point, it's amazing how quickly companies turn off. I've been around the world for a long time, but if anything, I'm a little bit of a nerd and push up my glasses. But I get in the field, and what has always changed the game for people that are really having to do the work and make the changes, and oftentimes be the ones at risk for their profit margins or other things if they don't do this right and effectively and efficiently. It's when they know that I'm really understanding the problem and that I'm willing to either put my time, my resources, money, and negotiation is a real part of the game. So the real game changing is when you can show people that you understand them. And it's amazing that in business, we forget that oftentimes, but that's really what it comes down to when you're negotiating on topics that really have impact.
Makes a lot of sense. Amit, I want to have you help us pivot to talking about how technologies can be an enabler and help solve some of these challenges. And we're going to talk a lot about blockchain. I appreciate that in the audience, there's probably people with different levels of understanding about blockchain. Can you give us a really quick tutorial on blockchain and its application in apparel sustainability efforts?
No, sure. I think there's a lot of brouhaha around blockchain, of course, and there's a lot of misconception. I think the easiest way, if you want to pitch a digital system, just put blockchain and it starts it raises awareness, right? For people who are not aware of the system, I would say at the most basic level, it's a database. It's a way to store data, right? I think all of us has worked in Excel spreadsheets, right? Which is a very simple way to store data. What's special about blockchain as a database is that once you store something on it, you write, it's not so easy to edit, to modify, unless and until all the parties involved actually agree to actually do another transaction or record, right? So that is the aspect that's called immutability. But you have to be very careful, because if you write BS on it, it stays as BS. So the immutability can also come back and bite you back, because you have to be sure still about the quality and the integrity of data that goes into it, right? The second important aspect of blockchain is it's a natural database that connects transactions to each other, because it's like your ledger, it's like your bank statement. Because it connects transactions to each other, it's a natural database to model and audit trail a supply chain transaction, because it's inbuilt to connect things to each other, right? And the third, I think, is quite an interesting one, but it's a conceptual breakthrough, and you can deliver it with or without blockchain, is the idea that you can take a physical asset, create a digital twin, and then the physical product is transformed across the supply chain through multiple intermediary products. The digital twin is also passed along, right? So you create a digital traceability. So I think, to me, those are the three basic innovations. But a lot of what we hear about blockchain, which is around cryptocurrency world, the fintech, which is where I think 99.5% of the work has happened. But I think the future majority of work would actually happen around supply chain, around auditing, around even the national governments. That's where I think the biggest impact overall over the long term. Yeah.
Great. Super helpful. Carrie, I want to talk to you a little bit about blockchain as well. Your career path, Apple, Brilliant Earth, now to Everledger. a platform solution provider, but you strike me as someone who's very thoughtful about where you spend your professional energy and the impact that you have. What are you seeing about supply chains and across industries that has you so excited about blockchain technologies and IoT that inspired you to make the move to Everledger?
Yeah, I struggle a lot with those decisions, and some of the key points that led me from Apple to, let's say, even Brilliant Earth started that journey into the world of technology and technology applications for real sustainability and circular economy impact. When I was at Apple, some of the anecdotes that I explained to people is that I was going all over the world, traveling constantly and trying to get refiners and mines, particularly, to disclose information about their sourcing on tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, and ultimately into other materials like cobalt and aluminum and so on. And oftentimes, and my old COO used to tease me and sometimes be frustrated. It's like, are you going to go have tea with these people again? And I'm like, yes, I am. Actually, that's exactly what I'll be doing. I'll be chatting with them. I'll be disclosing information about not only myself, but also our company and our goals and why sustainability or this target around traceability is necessary. It often also included me signing a personal NDA as Carrie George. Not as Apple, but as Carrie George, because that's how sensitive not only the information is, but just the relationships became. Blockchain technology, when you're talking about the enablement of permissioned data and that you are holding it, on that layer of the internet, that you're holding your information and that document and maybe only hashing certain information or certain data points, that's critical because most companies don't actually need to see the whole utility invoice or that actual invoice between the upstream relationship. You need to know that it exists, that it's a commercially recognized document, and that two parties and the relative weights and measurements are associated with it. That's not the whole document. That's not the pricing. That's not the information that becomes commercially sensitive. That, again, in supply chain management, there's plenty of reverse engineering that happens to try to outsmart, outdo, negotiate price, and so on. And the supply chains just learned people are too sensitive. So that was a key point that I recognized that I was so excited about these topics. I was willing to go and do all these things, but that's just not reasonable for most sustainability professionals to do as much as was required. Not only personally and professionally for me, but also from the corporation. And what I also recognized was that for things like circular economy strategies and, recycling, collection of material, we also needed so much more disaggregation for these initiatives. We need collection and tagging material across the world for true take back and gross and scalable solutions for consumer electronics, for apparel, for different types of plastics, low value assets across the world, but also high value assets like electric vehicle batteries. These will all be unique, separate initiatives that are reverse engineering in their own ecosystem, or not reverse engineering, but reverse logistics in their own ecosystems. That means that someone with a mobile app would be able to enter in on the block that they have collected a certain item, identify it, and bring it to that next partner in the logistics chain. That's a blockchain technology. That's a machine learning technology. These are all identification and unique strategies that you can't do with a centralized database. No centralized database is big enough, and no one trusts a centralized database uniformly across all the actors that need to be involved. So those are my real interest areas. And I recognize that we needed to do things differently. And as I started learning about different emerging technologies, I got very hungry and quickly went to a jewelry company where product specific claims really made sense and that they were interested in blockchain and different types of circular economy strategies, and was able to test that for a year and a half before hiring Everledger and then being hired by Everledger.
That's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned the end of life of products. Programming plug here. We do have a panel at the end of the day on circular business models and closing the loop. And no doubt we'll be talking about the importance of data to making that effective. Amit, I want to talk a little bit about just kind of the state of the apparel industry. Can we get your perspective on the state of sustainability in the apparel industry right now? We presented research this morning that demonstrates the importance of consumers, particularly in active lifestyle branded companies. You've been around the industry for a long time. Can you comment on current readiness of the supply chain to deliver on sustainability objectives and the wherewithal and appetite of textile companies and brands to improve?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you a very simple statistic on this, right? If you look at the top 100 fashion brands, they collectively drive about $1 trillion in apparel sales, so about 40% of the entire global apparel sales. Majority of these top 100 fashion brands have set a commitment of 100% sustainable and traceable raw materials target by 2025. Some of them even by 2022. I think Adidas has probably next year a target to achieve 100% recycled polyester, right? I think fantastic vision and ambition. But if you ask the second question, what percentage of the same top 100 brands can track their supply chain back to the raw material origin, right, around which the targets are announced? 95% of the same top 100 brands have limited to no visibility across the 6 to 7 tiers of the supply chain, right? So that's the fundamental disconnect we're looking at, the lack of systems and technology and lack of processes in place to deliver on a very ambitious vision. Because James, if you just go a couple of years back, you would not have imagined that the entire fashion industry making such very strong commitments around 100% sustainable and raw materials target. And I think what happened was few brands took a leading position, then few other brands followed, and before you know it, almost became like a race that I have to go and make a commitment. The boards were under tremendous pressure, the CEOs were under tremendous pressure. Before you know, the whole industry has announced a target. But when you start looking underneath, there's absolutely nothing. There's no process, there's no technology, there's no system in place where majority of brands, as I said, 95% have no visibility back to the tier 6 and 5, right? So I think from the readiness perspective, there's absolutely readiness very strong because these targets are out there. They're announced to the stakeholders, they're announced to the investors, they're internally to your employees and to your suppliers. The other important change that I see that will drive the industry to move there is the whole regulation part, which is also will increase the readiness because now, US has passed this regulation, if cotton coming from a certain region, we will not import it into the country. European Union has done the same, right? Increasingly, I think the country of origin and also the product labeling around the impact, the carbon impact, the embedded carbon impact that you're importing into a country. You're not just importing a product, you're actually importing, in a way, embedded CO2, right? I mean, once those regulations come into place, brands will have to really go very strong with their supply chain to understand the traceability, because if you do not know the product supply chain, your carbon impact could be plus minus 50%, plus minus 100%, because you're using so-called LCM analysis, which is average of an average of an average. Yeah. So if you ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, the readiness of the industry right now, I would say somewhere around 4, but there are very strong tailwinds which will push the industry, I would say, in the next 3 to 5 years to make a significant shift towards traceable materials because they want to specify only sustainable materials. We will see very little of commodity products left, is my belief, at least in the top 100, top 150 fashion brands. Very little commodity cotton, commodity polyester. It would be all sustainable, organic cotton, recycled polyester. Those are the kind of materials and products you would see. Yeah.
So that's super interesting perspective. So we in the investment community spend a lot of time looking at the very pretty ESG reports that set these lofty goals. And, of those companies that you mentioned that make up the majority of the industry, as you say, they've set ambitious goals. How many of them do you think are really equipped to deliver on those objectives?
Yeah, I mean, that is the key question. I mean, I would say majority of industries is using a lot of benchmark numbers, an average of an average number to kind of come up with those ESG impact. But if someone starts looking deeper, I mean, those lot of numbers are way off versus what's actually happening on the ground, right? And I think this challenge that we see, I think is again another fantastic tailwind from ESG-minded investors, where people are even taking their positions in their portfolio, offloading positions if companies are not reporting into ESG metrics, becomes another strong driver. And what we believe is without product traceability, you cannot make any meaningful product claim, and you cannot make any meaningful ESG impact claim. I mean, you can talk about a lot of, typically what a brand would say, okay, what's my average CO2 for a pair of denim? Let's say it's 20 kgs of CO2, roughly speaking, in the supply chain, not in the life usage, but in a supply chain for a pair of denim, maybe 20, 25 kgs of CO2, right? Now, based on whether the denim is produced in Brazil, which is a big denim industry, or whether denim is produced in Indonesia, which also has a big denim industry, the emissions could be twice what of 20 to 25 or half of that. And the major reason is Brazil has a lot of hydropower, so a lot of green power, and Indonesia still uses a lot of coal and oil also sometimes to create, to feed their electricity grid. So without knowing where the actual product is being produced, people use this 20 kgs of CO2 as a placeholder and multiply the entire denim production by that number to say this is my ESG impact, right? So I think that market will also see a huge shift in the coming 3 years, because there are certain brands who are taking leading position, reporting ESG based on actual product actuals, not on these the rule of a thumb kind of numbers. And I think with the increasing pressure from investors, I think I'll see a big shift there. Yeah.
Gosh, so many dimensions to think about. I'm really glad to have you guys here sharing perspective on those. Carrie, we've talked about traceability. Consumers have increasing appetite for transparency. How far away are we, you think, from this being more commonplace, where consumers can look at a garment and better understand the provenance or the CO2 greenhouse gas emissions impact of it? Are there any success stories out there in the marketplace where you think brands have provided more transparency to consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say something that's very North American facing right now. In terms of consumer home products, it's really taken off, and it's taken off because the buyers in the home, which primarily have to be home caregivers, in many cases that ends up being women, but they've been marketing in terms of toilet paper, non-toxic goods, other things along those lines, because it crosses so many different interest areas. Health and safety in my home and the consumer, sustainability issues, human rights, social impact, livelihood development for your community. So there's been a lot of traceability in that space. There's been a lot of poor claims and claims management, but there is a lot of verifiable claims in the home goods space. And you do see a lot of really big companies having a lot of success, and then startups having also a lot of success in food traceability, plastics reduction, et cetera, and packaging, those sort of things. Other consumer products, jewelry has traditionally always had to have more specific claims per product, which is unique and exactly what Amit's talking about. There's a lot of generalizations at a product level that consumers will accept. In the jewelry market, they want to know that that gem is exactly what that gem is and where it came from and the story and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of a play that's happened in the consumer jewelry space that is starting to expand elsewhere. That's one of the reasons my CEO and founder, Leanne Kemp, really started in the jewelry space, because she could see the writing on the wall that she could really test a lot of these technologies. We've since expanded to many different industries with low value assets as well as high value assets. But you see us being able to play in the space with Alexander McQueen and work with Avery Dennison and other partners in the wine space to play around those really specific product claims to prevent not only fraud, but also to ensure the claims about the production, whether that be sustainability or circular economy production, or other production aspects of, efficiencies and other things that could be part of it, are enabled through the technology, and then ultimately to different types of consumer reporting, but also government and investor reporting.
Great. Amit, the Shenzhen cotton situation, that's really propelled fiber traceability into the spotlight. Are you indeed seeing that that's inspiring brands to allocate resources to fiber traceability and try to solve that challenge? Clearly, you have this vision for fiber to retail traceability. Can you highlight some success stories and speak to where you think this could become more commonplace?
Yes, absolutely. So let me start with your first point, right? If you ask any brand, do you have a group called Raw Material Assurance Group or a product integrity group, right? You will rarely find fashion brands 5 years ago having these groups called product integrity, or raw material assurance. And you'll be surprised now when you check with the brands now, there are increasing number of top fashion brands who have either on the raw material integrity or actually on the whole traceability, a dedicated function, right? So to me, that shift is happening very strongly, very visibly. And the reason, James, is that traceability and sustainability to me are two sides of the same coin. You cannot make any credible sustainability claim without underpinning it with traceability. Because if you try to make, it's actually a lot of hot air because you just don't know. There's no way you can verify, and there's no way you can prove it. So any sustainability claim has to be married very strongly with the traceability backbone. That's what we see, and that's what we tell all our customers. They're deeply connected topics. Yeah? Then coming to your success stories, we have been working very extensively with Lenzing, which is one of the leading fiber producers from Austria, with Schneider Group in Italy, which is one of the leading wool and cashmere producer, to create end-to-end traceability for their sustainable products. And on the brand side, last year we announced partnership or trials with a Kering Group in France, Bestseller in Denmark, to create end-to-end traceability spanning 10 different countries, their supply chain. And just, I think, a few weeks ago, we announced two major partnerships. One is with U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, which drives 15 to 20% of global cotton supply, to have the traceability of U.S. cotton as a differentiated product for the brands globally. And one with H&M, where we'll be running trials, hundreds of suppliers, million plus products, ongoing purchase orders for the rest of the year to actually drive this large scaling programs. Yeah? And all this is in the public domain, so I can talk about this. And there are a few which is kind of in the kitchen. So once it comes out of kitchen, then I will let you know about those success stories. Yeah.
Great. Amit, do you want to take a moment and talk about fiber coins specifically? Just kind of explain the product and the concept and how it works for and with brands.
Yes. So I think the idea is quite simple, that because the value chain is very big and you have about 60 years in the supply chain, textile and fashion industry is very special. It looks very simple, but when you start digging, it's so complex because a lot of commissioning, a lot of blending happens. You mix products, right? So FiberCoin essentially is an idea where whenever a sustainable product is introduced into the supply chain, we create a digital token for every kg of product, right? So when a U.S. cotton ships, let's say 100 kgs of U.S. cotton to a spinner, the spinner account on our system automatically receives 100 U.S. cotton fiber coins, right? It creates a digital token for every kg of product. What it does is that in the supply chain network, you will never have more sustainable material that originally produced at the point of origin, right? If you talk to someone in the cashmere industry, which is a very premium product, they would say there's twice as much cashmere marketed than physically produced. And then you scratch your head, how can it happen? It happens because there is no way to control the amount of certified material entering into the production network at the point of origin. Likewise, recycled polyester demand is going through the roof, right? Everyone wants to go for recycled polyester from PET bottles. People are saying there is 3 times as much recycled polyester marketed than physically can be produced. Again, because of the fact nowhere to control. So Fibercoin is first core principle is to digitize your authentic production entering into the network at the point of origin. So you'll never have more supply in the system than actually produced, right? And the second, it creates a digital chain of custody as people exchange products. Those tokens are transferred along the supply chain. You create a digital traceability across the whole value chain, taking care into account this blending and composition that are continuously mixed in the fashion industry.
Great.
So I hope that gives you a bit of a perspective on the Fibercoins. Yeah.
No, super helpful. It seems like you're really well positioned in an interesting market opportunity, and clearly that's been recognized by a lot of leading brands. Kerry, I want to switch gears a little bit. I don't think we've given proper attention to sustainability considerations at end of a product's life. I've seen statistics, there's $500 billion worth of apparel lost annually because product isn't recycled. Can you talk for a moment, elaborating on your comments earlier in the presentation about the importance of traceability and labeling to apparel for reuse or recycling?
Absolutely. And I'll piggyback a lot on Amit's comments, because I think we're of like minds here in our experience in the supply chain, as well as the challenges of some of these claims. I couldn't underscore enough how much bluntly fraud is out there right now in terms of recycled content and other aspects towards these goals. Once these goals are made, all of a sudden, somehow magically, this material has just come about in these supply chains when there was never these reverse logistics enablements before. So, oceans plastics cannot be at a 500%. Reporting or whatever the percentage is of content globally. We have a long way to go. And so some of the goals that I have is I'm working to actually look at these these collection models that are verified, that actually have, real veracity, and connect them with these ecosystems more directly, so that it isn't just a haphazard, I saw a piece of paper and I'm going to go with it as if that's clearly done. And what you're seeing with things like recycled polyester sourcing is that you really have to see that the plastic is coming through the supply chain and then ultimately to the various steps and transformations to get it to its polyester state. Some of that, what that means, and I'll give you 3 examples of different collection models that we're looking at or have worked with directly. Partnerships with organizations in India. There's a thriving part of the Indian economy that has existed for many, many years, for many generations, in just plastics collection, and that there's layers of that with traders and other things, but it's done in a cash basis in many cases. And so digitizing those transformations, not so dissimilar to us trying to digitize small scale mining in East Africa. The same kind of challenges exist in terms of it's usually cash-based, it's usually small scale. But what we're looking at is also just how to use mobile money and different technologies to create that enablement for financial transactions to be the first of the scenarios to be tracked. We work with partners and are looking at different partners in Indonesia and the Philippines that also do plastics collection, and they have their own blockchain enablements for that, and that we would look at different types of interoperability there. And then we've done a pilot with Australia with their containers for cash exchange, and having that fully traceable and then digitized so that we can actually really loop back the supply chain. Same issues. And if you're talking about tracing cotton from problematic areas, whether that be in China or other parts of the world, there are different ways that you have to strategize to trace those materials so that you can make those claims. Same with recycled content, small scale as well as large scale activities.
Great. And Amit, for the benefit of someone who's publishing investment research on lifestyle brands, can you speak, based on your perspective, what you're seeing, how big is the spread in sustainability efforts between the leaders and the laggards, those laggards that might be public companies and trying to come along, but still meaningfully behind the leaders? How big is that gap, and how long could it take those laggards to close the gap, if you think it's even achievable?
Yes, yes. So I think the first, I would say the gap, what we see both on sustainability side and also on the traceability side is significant and meaningful gap between the laggards and actually on the leaders. And on traceability side, I mean, most of them are starting at the same point, I would say, but it's actually going to increase. And what we also see is that will become a big driver of competitive differentiation between brands who are actually able to demonstrate sustainability and traceability at scale versus other players who not, right? And because that to me is no longer a differentiation, it's a license to operate, right? It's a license that, look, you have the right to be on the consumer's choice. And I think probably 3 to 5 years down the line, you're not even in the consumer's list, as a brand to choose from, because you do not meet those basic requirements. You become like a commodity product, right? So I would say that the difference I can't quantify, but I would say probably 50% in terms of performance between a leader and a laggard, and it's going to increase. It's not going to decrease because you have to invest in this. This thing doesn't happen overnight. I think that's the biggest challenge we face. Brands think you call your tier 1 supplier, they call the tier 2, and voila, you have traceability. And these things required 2-year transformation to have a traceable supply chain, 3-year transformation, and real hard work in the field. So I think that will become a very, very important from the investment perspective. I would say the brands who are investing in traceability will definitely have a much, much better advantage over guys who are not.
It seems like a big component of it is just organizational wherewithal and the executives' attention and willingness to invest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, Kerry, we're coming up on the end of the session. Before we do, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about some of Everleisure's work outside of the apparel and footwear category. I know you're doing some really cool things, working on product lifecycle in the battery sector and some work on plastics.
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch. I got to touch a little bit on plastics, so dive in on some of the work we're doing on batteries. Again, a lot of overlap with some of these discussions, in that batteries can be for lower value assets, such as consumer electronics and power tools and other things that have those batteries that need to get into the recycling and circular economy supply chains. But you also have really high value assets such as electric vehicle batteries, that either one, we want to make sure that they're getting into circular economy, enablements. In the lower value assets, we're working with different types of consumer facing applications so that consumers can find their nearest drop-off point, can get logistics managed to make sure that if they need to mail it or if they want to drop it or have someone pick it up, that those would be potential enablements that we can connect them with, but also incentivizing the consumers. And we talked about incentives for, supply chain actors, but consider a consumer really part of that supply chain, and whether they want a coupon on their next purchase, or that they would be able to get certain social media points or play part of a game and enable it through gamification. These are all different strategies that we're playing with as part of our U.S. Department of Energy grant. And we'll continue to do some of this work, but we're hoping that these types of applications will spread and can also ripple effect into other assets that we're hoping to collect and enable for the circular economy.
Maybe one last question, just because, gosh, there's been so much good content. For either of you, to what extent do you think government regulation could play into traceability and the use of some of these technologies?
Kerry, why don't you go first, please? Yeah.
Thank you, Amit. That's kind of. I think there's a few specific areas, but I'm never interested in government defining too much, but definitely enabling the incentives. And so, and we talked a little bit about incentives overall, but for sustainability impact, enabling a company to do their own type of reporting, but that they should be reporting year-on-year progress and clear transparency towards either mitigation of human rights issues. So publicly identifying child labor, forced labor scenarios, and how they're influencing and contributing to those efforts. Similarly, on circular economy strategies, clear transparency about how much you're producing, how much you're collecting, how much ends up in your supply chain, and how much gets collected for other supply chains. Clear metrics, simple reporting, make it frank, and then that also helps the subject matter experts and the people in the supply chains focus on targets that make sense and are not playing with different types of more PR strategies.
Amit, anything to add to that?
No, I think this is very well put, Kerry. So there is nothing to add. I think the having that clarity in terms of a regulatory framework and clear metrics is so important, what Kerry mentioned too. And I think in my sense, what I see is that there's a sense of urgency that's building up in different regulatory bodies, be it European Commission, be it even in certain countries in Asia, certain, in US, because they've given a lot of time to brands and retailers, but nothing has really moved meaningful there, be it on social conditions, labor, and so on and so forth. So what I see is that sense of urgency, which is fantastic, partly driven by public opinion and public pressure. And I think that's needed to kind of move the needle. And it becomes a level playing field also, right? Because sometimes I think certain brands might think, look, I'm doing it so much, am I getting, the returns? That always plays in the back of your mind. But if you have a level playing field, look, this is the rules of the game, and then this is how you declare it, and then it becomes very clear who is performing at which level. It also takes the greenwashing out of the picture. So I think it's just fantastic to be in this in this industry at this time on these topics. What we're working on is what I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was a really awesome session. Amit, Kerry, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for sharing your insights. I really learned a lot. We appreciate you being with us today. And thanks for working with Stifel.
No,
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Amit. Thanks, Kerry. Next session coming up in about 12 minutes. We have a great presentation from a private company, Somersault, a sustainability leader. So look forward to seeing you on that as well. Thanks so much, everyone.